Welcome to the Craftsman Founder Podcast, hosted by Lucas Carlson. Every week, we talk to founders, entrepreneurs, and those who've made a craft out of creating companies and enterprises. Listen every week to get ideas for starting, promoting, and growing your business. There are no shortcuts, just good old-fashioned hard work and craft. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's interview.
Hello, this is Lucas Carlson from the Craftsman Founder Podcast. I'm really excited because this week I get to interview somebody who's doing some amazing work, both as an author and as an entrepreneur, Michelle Miller. She is writing, she is creating a company, she is doing venture-backed stuff, she is creating a business out of writing more than just, it's not like a regular author who's just writing a novel. She's actually thinking about from day zero, before she even, I'm not even sure, we'll find out if she started writing before she had the idea for the company or if the company and the idea came at the same time. But we're going to find out. So tell us about your background, Michelle.
So my background, I grew up in North Carolina and came out west for undergrad at Stanford. And I graduated in 2006, which was an interesting year because it was kind of this year where the really super, high GPA, ambitious gunners were fighting for jobs at Lehman Brothers, and the people who had a little bit more balance in their lives went and worked at Facebook, and we all kind of know who made the better call there. And so I went to work in consulting and did that for a few years, and then went back to business school at Stanford and decided that that was going to be the time that I really found what I wanted to do. And so I dabbled in a lot of startups and tried a lot of different things and stumbled into a creative writing class with a bunch of freshmen at Stanford, and that's where I really discovered this interest in writing and in content creation. And ended up working at JP Morgan after school for a lot of personal reasons, but at the same time was writing and cultivating that practice through pseudonyms, and I wrote several books under pseudonyms and a lot of stuff on the internet under fake names, which taught me a lot and helped me kind of find my voice. And then I left about a year ago to do it full time. And so
I should have thought of that because I'm writing my first novel, and I have no idea if it's going to be great or terrible. I should have used a pseudonym.
Oh, pseudonyms are amazing. I tell writers this all the time, that they should just write under pseudonyms because it takes all the pressure off. You can take credit for it when you want to, but if it's not any good, then you just plausible deniability.
Great. So the Underwriting is your new project, is that right?
Yes.
Tell us about the Underwriting.
So the Underwriting is it's a novel. It's a serial novel about an investment bank underwriting the IPO of a Silicon Valley startup. The startup is a location-based dating app that is a lot like Tinder, but isn't. And I delivered it over the course of 12 weeks on our website, theunderwriting.com. So it launched on March 5th. And basically the way it worked is every week a new installment aired on our website. It was free for 24 hours on the browser, or you could purchase it for $1.50 as a text or an audio file. And it came with a lot of other transmedia elements. So we had DJ playlists every week. We had photography and music and artwork and brand sponsors every week and finance tutorials. So really trying to create a world around this content, which also included the business model, which was getting backing by investors and then doing it entirely like a startup.
Wow. So was the idea for the book and the idea for the business at the same time?
Yes. I'm really interested in the relationship between business and art, actually from the artistic view, and can you create businesses that are consistent with the art that they do? And I think that's something that's really interesting in advertising to me. Is there something beautiful about marketing that feels consistent with content and that actually enriches the content? And to me, if you can create a business model that is consistent with your readership and with your artistic message, then that actually just makes it richer. So that was kind of always the idea.
Wow, that's really cool. I just picked up a book recently that kind of had that same idea, and it was talking about, was it Jim Henson, about how you can create a company that is about the art but not give up all of your ideals. That's a really
Right.
interesting idea.
Yeah. It makes all the
So
decisions a little bit more difficult because you have to see them through both lenses. But I
yeah,
think that's part of the fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. So you've done a lot of innovative things. A lot of authors, when they go into writing, all they do is they just start writing. But
Yeah.
you came up with an idea to get venture capital, to get brand
Mhm.
sponsorship, screensavers. These are a lot of things that most authors never even
Right.
think of.
Right.
So what's worked well for you? What hasn't worked well for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it came from how I like to read and noticing my own habits. I did a lot of work with the D school at Stanford when I was there, and there's this notion in design thinking of really looking at your user and understanding their process and then designing your work around that. And so I looked at how I read when I was working, and I read a lot of blogs. I read online. I always had headphones in because I was always listening to Spotify playlists while I was working. I constantly was looking things up. So like if something had something interesting in it, then I would go like Wikipedia, something that I didn't understand. I had really a hard time keeping track of characters. And so all of these little things collectively became the experience that I tried to create in the underwriting. So we had business cards for all the characters so that you could keep those straight. We had a map that showed you all the places that we were mentioning. We had playlists in case you wanted to listen to music while you read. We had finance tutorials so that you didn't have to go to Wikipedia to figure out what an IPO or a stock option or whatever the term was that I was using within the story itself. We had this escape button that had the screensaver, so if your boss came by, you could click on the escape button and it filled up with something that looked like work. So it was very much designed with the user in mind. I think that some of it people caught on to, some of it people didn't. But again, the great thing about doing things on the internet is that I think that readers have a real flexibility with trying things out. People, they're more what's the word, more patient with experimentation, I think, online than they might be in television or film. And then because of analytics, you can see what works and what doesn't. And so season one of the underwriting was very much about trying everything and seeing what worked. And then season two, I think, will really tailor it to try and bring everything up a notch, which will probably mean eliminating some of those extra things and just getting to the core of what was good for readers.
Was there any one thing that stood out as really worked really well for you?
Everybody loved the escape buttons, which were those screensavers. So when you had that, and I think it was just that people thought it was clever, and I loved writing them. They were really fun to design. So,
That's really cool.
so I definitely liked it.
I just found the name of the book that I just got. Make
Oh
Art,
yeah.
Make Money: Lessons from Jim Henson.
Oh,
On
I love it.
have you seen that one?
No, but
It's by Elizabeth Stevens, and I don't know where I saw it, but I just picked it up because I heard this concept of how Jim Henson really didn't want to give up his ideals in making art, but he wanted to commercialize it and build a
yeah.
business on it, and going back and forth on those tensions. I haven't finished it yet, but it's really good to start with.
Right. Oh, I love that notion because I do think that they it's not just that they shouldn't have to be separate, it's that I don't think they can be separate to really be the best art or business that you want.
Yeah.
But it does require sort of shifting your concepts of both a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of authors don't even want to think about the business side. And then a lot of entrepreneurs don't think of creating a business as an art either. So it's kind of
Right.
That's kind of what I find so fascinating about the intersection between novel writing and entrepreneurship. So what do you think entrepreneurs can learn from authors and vice versa?
Oh, they're so similar, aren't they? It's crazy. I think writing a book and starting a company are so the same emotional journey, if nothing else, because you really are starting from scratch. And I think, what I think is probably the most interesting lesson that I learned from a creative writing teacher was she basically said, the minute that you stop being interested in what you're writing, you've lost it. Because if you are not interested, then that's going to come through, and your readers aren't going to be interested either. And there were so many times, I don't know about you, when you're writing, there's so many times when I'm writing where I'm like, I really hate this character. Like, I do not like writing this scene. And that for me is always this moment of stepping back and being like, why do you not like writing this scene? Why do you not like this character? Because if you don't, you can't possibly expect someone else to. Yeah. And I think that's a really good lesson for entrepreneurship too, is like if you are losing, we talk so much about passion, and passion has become such a diluted term, but at the end of the day, it really matters that you have that you're fueling that interest, because I think once you lose that, the whole thing starts to break.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I also think there's something, and push back on me if you disagree, but there's something so interesting about being in this vacuum of, you start writing a book, and everybody's like, yeah, that's cute, you're writing a book. Or you start a company, and especially in San Francisco, people are like, yeah, so does everybody. And so you really can't rely on external validation at all, which for me was a really groundbreaking thing, living in this life that had to that point been all about kind of checking the next box on my resume, and all of a sudden being like, this better be something that you enjoy spending 16 hours a day on, because you ain't getting anything from anybody else for it.
I know. I totally agree. The novel writing process for me, I haven't finished with my first novel yet, and I have no idea if it's any good. I'm having fun writing it, but like at the end of the day, I have no clue whether it's going to be great or terrible, and I'm not going to know for another few months, and it's just completely nerve-wracking. But it's also this, like you said, it's similar for a lot of startup founders when they're creating an idea that they're kind of the only ones who believe in it for a long time, and
for a long time.
You have to suspend having external validation for a long time if you're going to start a company.
Yeah.
So what do you think authors can teach entrepreneurs about marketing? Because I think a lot of startup founders think, if I build it, they will come. If I write it, they will come. But I think that self-publishing is teaching authors that there's, you can actually take marketing into your own hands. And what do you think authors can teach entrepreneurs about marketing?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think it's all about stories, isn't it? I mean, I think that's what people gravitate towards always. And how do you really understand your story and understand your story arc and understand the characters? And also, I mean, again, I think, I don't know what your novel is like, but for me, the most interesting and fun part is getting to know my characters. And that's where I always start, is kind of, I mean, before I even started writing, I had 30 pages on each of my characters, and it's, I know everything about them. They are so real to me. Where I know where Todd went to elementary school, and I know when he lost his virginity, and I know what his relationship is with his father, and having that level of intimacy, I think, with your characters. I try to do this when I'm in my business mind. I try and have that same level of intimacy with my consumers.
That's
and
interesting.
Really understand their tics. Because once you do that, it's all very natural, and it doesn't feel like work. It's just like, oh yeah, of course I'm gonna go have coffee with Todd. It sounds a little crazy, but
no, that's really interesting, because I think that a lot of founders get so excited about building something for themselves that they don't even think about why would somebody else use this? What is that person? What is that ideal customer? In writing, you write to an ideal reader, but in creating a company, you can also think about the ideal customer. Who is that person? Why would they care when they found you?
Right. And what is the story arc that led them to it? What was going through their mind in that moment? One of my favorite marketing stories is Method hand soap. I don't know if you know this case study, but it's Method, which has obviously become an incredibly popular company. But all of these soap companies, these companies that did hand soap, were doing all this marketing testing on, is it this scent, or is it the microbeads, or is it foam versus, liquid soap, And Method just went and they sat in the aisle when women were actually, it was mostly women who buy hand soap, when they were buying the hand soap in the grocery store, and they asked them at the point of purchase, they're like, what are you thinking about right now? And all of them said what it's going to look like in my guest bathroom. And all that they cared about was how pretty was it, when guests came over and used their powder room. And so it's like, it wasn't about what was in the bottle at all. It was actually about what the bottle looked like
That's so
next to the
interesting.
sink. And so that to me is how everyone should be approaching business and art. It's kind of what is going, if you want to be commercial, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's so fascinating because I think that the natural place people go in startup land for storytelling is investors, because they feel like, oh, I'm a startup founder, I have to tell this story to the investors.
Right.
And then, you at some point, entrepreneurs will realize, well, I have to also tell stories to my employees and to potential employees to get them on board.
Yeah.
But even to my customers, not only do I need to tell stories to my customers, I need to understand the stories about how they came there in the first place. That's
Right.
very interesting.
Yeah.
So when you write, do you plot? Or are you a plotter or a pantser?
What's a pantser?
A pantser is going by the seat of your pants.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard that before. um, oh, I go back and forth. I always start with character. I mean, my whole process is I have these, I decide the characters that I want, that I'm interested in. And then I start putting them together, and like they'll have conversations. And it's like, oh, it would be really interesting if Todd talked to Tara. Let's go see, where would they be talking together? Oh, they would be doing this, and what would they be talking about? And then I write a lot of that dialogue, and some of it ends up being scenes, and some of it doesn't. But it all helps me learn. And then again, all of my writing, I like it to have, because I'm writing episodically and in this format of it needs to have 12 parts and each one needs to function as its own thing. It always has to have a pretty clear structure that has to go with some kind of timeline. So the IPO was brilliant because it's very easy to break an IPO down into 12 parts. And that kind of allows some form. And then you just have the things, and I always line out the themes that I really want to address that are really important to me to get across. And I have kind of the checklist of things that I want to accomplish. And then it's just this puzzle. And you write a little, and you write scenes, and then you're like, oh, that scene should go here instead of there, and then that has to change because the plot has to change. So I always have an Excel spreadsheet that is a plot, but it changes constantly.
Oh,
So
that's cool. That's a
I'm
really
an ADD
interesting
plotter,
hybrid.
I guess.
Yeah. And so you picked startup fiction, and how do you feel about that choice? I'm also writing a startup thriller, so I feel like
Oh,
there
awesome.
is this need for
Yeah.
some more fiction in the startup space, but you've actually got it. You've got it out there.
Yeah.
How's the reaction been? Is there a thirst for startup fiction?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't, I guess for me the gap is actually in, the gap for me exists in, like, I think that there's not really good, I think there's this real disparity between like 50 Shades of Grey and Faulkner.
Uh-huh.
And I really like that in-between space that I don't think has been well defined for 25 to 40-year-olds. And I really like thinking of writing for the 25 to 40-year-old urban professional in an aesthetic that's sort of a $30 bottle of wine. So it's a challenge maybe. It's a little bit richer and more intense for someone who's used to drinking like boxed rosé, but it's not offensive to a wine connoisseur. And I think that area, that kind of mid-grade, that mid-grade content exists in television and HBO, it exists in film, it exists even in journalism now, I think through Vice, which is a fascinating brand that I've learned a lot from. And so I wanted to create that for fiction as well. So for me, my book is more kind of about those people, those 25 to 40-year-olds who can bridge the gap between pop culture and intellectual liberal arts majors or whatever they were. But it's more about those people, and because it's about those people, and I think those people have been so informed by Wall Street and Silicon Valley, my story necessarily had to be set in those two places. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And do you find that you're resonating with that community? Are they excited?
Yeah. I think that been really rewarding to see that that's who's reading and who's engaging. And what's exciting about that is I think those are traditionally people who when I started, they're like, "Well, it's really cute that you're doing this, Michelle, but I don't read books." you know. And I don't read fiction. And then all of a sudden, you know, I loved it in like week 4 when I had probably 5 friends who had all said, like, it's nice that you're doing this, but I don't read fiction and I don't read books, so I'll buy it to support you. And then we got to like week 4 of the episodic release, and they all sent me emails and they're like, I just want to binge on it. And you realize that by binging on it, you're reading a book.
Cool.
So I think sometimes it's just about repackaging. But to your point about startup fiction, I completely agree that Silicon Valley hasn't been covered to the extent that it can be, and there's so many stories there. Though I do think that it has the same challenge that you know, law and medicine had pre-Law and Order or pre-John Grisham and pre-ER, which is that it's really hard to understand from the outside, and
Yes.
And so you really have to have an intimate, and it's hard to make work interesting, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think that the stuff that's happening on TV, like Shark Tank and Silicon Valley, are starting to set the groundwork for a better understanding about what's going on. Even though those aren't like real life, they at least set the stage for general public understanding of startups.
Yeah, definitely.
So to get a little technical, I'm just curious, what
Please.
writing apps do you use? Do you just use Word, or do you have something else?
I just use Word and Dropbox. I probably should use. I'm actually phenomenally technologically incompetent. So yeah, I just use Word, and I have, you know, a million notebooks. I write a lot of things by hand, and then transfer it in.
And do you do it by like a set word count a day, or is it amount of time a day? How do you approach the writing process?
Such a strange. I wish so badly that I were someone who could just sit down and write in small pockets, but I have to just like completely check out. So my writing process is very much I go away and I can make it about 4 days, and it's sort of this, like the Underwriting, it was 3 months, and it was I would get up on Monday and I would write I would write 4 3-hour chunks. So it was 3 hours, then I would take a break of 3 hours, and I would do that 4 times. And do that 4 days in a row, and then my brain wouldn't work anymore.
Wow.
And so I would take a few days off and then go back at it and do the same thing. But I wrote the Underwriting in a little over 2.5 months. 2.5 months, 2.5, 3 months. So I guess I was doing like an episode and a half a week, or more or less. But no, I try not to like constrain yourselves, because you know how it is. Sometimes you're just like in the flow and it's all coming, and then other times you spend an entire day on a paragraph, but that paragraph is really important. So I think a lot of it is also learning not to panic when you're blocked, and like just how do you get through the block as quickly as possible, and knowing like, does that mean going for a run or going for a yoga class, and allowing yourself to do that. And not judging yourself when you have that day, because sometimes you're working when you don't realize you're working, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that is a really good piece of advice for startup founders too. When you feel like you're pinned against the wall and you have no clue what to do, you know, stop beating yourself up and go for a run, walk, you know, enjoy the outside instead of trying to break through. That makes sense?
Yeah, completely.
So what are your inspirations? What inspired you to write the Underwriting? What writing do you like to read? What's your background and inspiration?
Yeah, that's my inspiration. I'm really interested in this idea of empathy and this notion. I think that we're in a world that has become so full of, I don't know, maybe it's just that I'm getting older, but it feels so angry. Everybody feels so angry all the time. And I think you read the news and it's so, and it's not just like, I think people are like, you know, Fox News is so fear-mongering. I think all of it's fear-mongering. Like everything feels so fearful and so angry. And at the end of the day, I don't believe that people are bad. I don't. And I think the majority of people are not bad people. I think that they sometimes do bad things. And I think that that's largely because their context creates situations that make them feel trapped, and then they make bad decisions. And for me, I think working on Wall Street during the Occupy movement was really fascinating because you saw these younger kids, these analysts who frankly they worked 120 hours a week. They hated their lives, and they're sitting there looking at these people yelling at them, and they're like, "I hate my life. Why are you yelling at me?" And it was just this lack of understanding, and especially coming from so many good people that I knew. They were not bad people that worked on Wall Street. Did some of them make mistakes? Yes, but there was this whole infrastructure that encouraged that. And so for me, I think a lot of the inspiration was just can we create through fiction an understanding of characters that you're never going to be able to create in a journalism piece, right? Because then people are judging and they're forming opinions. If you just approach an op-ed without an open mind, in a way that you approach fiction with a very open mind. And so how can you create characters that show context, that break down stereotypes? So you can show, all right, you might not like Todd Kent in my book, but at least you understand why he does what he does. In the same way that you watch The Sopranos, and you don't want to be friends with Tony Soprano, but you understand why he does what he does. Walter White is strange, but you care about him. And that, to me, is really, really important. How do you create, through that, more empathy, frankly, in society?
That's really cool. And who do you read? What authors inspire you?
I don't read nearly as much as I should. It makes me too self-conscious right now. But I all the classics. I mean, I studied Dostoevsky as an undergrad. I was a Russian lit major, and I think Dostoevsky was hugely. That sounds so egotistical. Dostoevsky is my influence. To be 1% as incredible as he is. But I think again, just his characters and his ability to be so much in Raskolnikov's head that you forget that he's a murderer. To understand him so well, and that just tapping into human nature, I think is really interesting. So him and Faulkner was really influential, just the experimentation with that. And there's a really amazing book that's been hugely influential called The Life and Adventures of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman. It's by Lawrence Stern, and it's this incredibly esoteric satire. And it is hilarious. I cry. I laugh so hard when I read it. And it was published episodically, but he has just such a light, clever air about mocking how seriously we take the world and how seriously we take things. And I strive for that aesthetic because I think cleverness and wit are so important.
Interesting. So how do you think about traditional publishing? You clearly are not going the traditional publishing route at all, but did you consider it?
Well, I am and I'm not. I mean, I'm now. I just met with editors all last week about selling my book as a traditional book. But that's the thing. It was never for me about bunking the traditional method. It was just it's really hard as a first-time writer to get anyone to pay attention to you, and that process is so it's like you spend a year writing your book, and then you spend another chunk of time trying to find an agent. And that's a very difficult system. And then your agent, then you have to do all these revisions for your agent. And then you have to shop it to publishers. And then you have to do all the revisions for the publishers. And by the time you actually get it out, that's 2 years if you're lucky after you've already finished. And I think for me, this book in particular couldn't wait that long because it's so much about online dating apps and the time. I couldn't wait 2 years. It won't be relevant 2 years from now in the same way that I think it could be relevant now. And I also think that, it's how do you encourage this system. Content is so much moving towards YouTube celebrities, right? And TV has adapted to this where they say we're going to go scour YouTube for the hot YouTube celebs and then we're going to bring them on. And publishing hasn't. It's starting to get there, but I think that if you want to go traditional, and you're not John Grisham, then you might as well try it online first and get as much of an audience as you can so that you have more power going into that, so that you can at least say, these are the readers that I've got. And then I just think that it's a way of it's worth the effort, and it actually doesn't take much more time to try and build some audience yourself. That
makes a lot of sense. So you raised venture capital for this adventure. Do you think that fiction is a viable investment for venture capitalists? Do you think more investors should look into investing into fiction?
I would like them to, since I'm about to go start raising money. So I first of all, I've raised money from venture capitalists, but not through it wasn't institutional money. So I didn't actually raise through any institutions. But the idea for me was always to make a bigger company out of this, because I do think that that investing in content is not unlike making venture investments, right? You do, I think you seek capital to lots of different projects and try and make it so that all of them break even, but one of them is a blockbuster, and then overall you do pretty well. And so that to me is not unlike investing in a portfolio of apps or a portfolio of social media things. Because at the end of the day, I think that while you can't predict what content is going to succeed, you can't predict what apps are going to succeed. And anybody that tells you that there's a model that's going to predict that is lying. So I think it's yeah.
In that way, do you think that the big five publishers are kind of the main venture capitalists of the writing world?
I definitely think they're the original venture capitalists, right? Lots of bets. I just think I don't know, I think the big five are going through so many changes. It'll be really interesting to see what shakes out in the next few years.
It's interesting because even though they are kind of like venture capitalists because the big five make lots of bets and most of them don't pan out,
right.
It's a lot different than venture capital because authors are treated more like just content monkeys and not in entrepreneurship with traditional investment.
Right.
The founder is expected to go to market, to do all the marketing, to do all the work, and it's just money. But that hasn't happened in the book writing world yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I do think that there's and it's interesting. But I think there is this perception in publishing that in order to be a good writer, you can't possibly also be presentable.
Yeah.
And I'm not. And I think that there is a category of artists for which that is absolutely true. And I've never pretended that I am like the next great American novelist, and I would never think that I would be, because I do think they're different skill sets. But I do think there are a lot of writers who like doing both, and why not take advantage of that, you know?
Yeah, well also, I mean, this idea just popped in my head. You think of obvious examples, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak couldn't market the things he made, the things he created.
Right.
So sometimes it doesn't need to be in the same person, but in the startup world, a lot of the time, venture capitalists are looking for that person that can do both create a product out of nothing, but also figure out how to take it to market. And so it's interesting.
Well, it's also interesting to think about the team element. I've been thinking a lot lately about writing teams and where that could exist in fiction writing. Because, I mean, I think that that's what's so appealing to me about writing for television is that you have this whole writer's room and you collaborate together, and I think that's an interesting notion to apply, that I'm certainly thinking about applying to episodic fiction, of can you get the team, and then, or even can you get that partnership where you do have Jobs and Wozniak kind of team up to make a novel.
Yeah, that makes
really
sense.
Interesting.
Do you think that more fiction authors should consider looking for investors, not publishers, for their novels?
It's a lot of work. Raising money is hard and not fun. And so there's a trade-off. And it creates a new constituency that you have to report to. So I think it's up to everybody. It was kind of, for me, it was so much about, there are certain stresses that are really good for me, and there are certain stresses that are really bad for me. And for me, time pressure is great, and people pressure is great. I look for bosses everywhere because I like having expectation. Money pressure is terrible for me. Money pressure just really paralyzes me, and it makes me make bad decisions. And so for me, investment made a lot of sense because it created the good stresses, but it eliminated kind of the negative one. So it was a good trade-off for me. I don't think it's a good trade-off for everybody.
Fascinating. So what's next for the underwriting? I personally have been reading it myself. I'm very much enjoying it. I haven't finished it yet, so don't spoil anything. But what's next? I know the Underwriting 2 is on its way, right?
Yeah, so the Underwriting was part 1 of 5. So we're going to start distributing the next one hopefully next spring. So we're working on the traditional publishing contract right now. So I'm hoping to have a print book out in time to start doing that. We're selling the TV rights, which is really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just started writing the pilot, which was really fun. It's fun to write. It's just a totally different medium, and to understand your characters through that medium, it's really fascinating artistically. And then I'm starting a company also to do episodic fiction for this demographic with other works, and I'm really, really jazzed about that. So that should get up and rolling in the next couple of months here. So
what's that company called?
It's going to be called White Label.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that's the first time I've ever said it.
Yay!
You heard it here first. But yeah, I'm really excited about that.
Well, it has been a real pleasure talking with you.
Likewise.
I hope that we can continue the dialogue and
Sure.
check in as White Label launches.
Thank you. Thank you. And
well, thank you for your time.
Me on. Likewise. Good luck writing your book.
Thank you.
All right. Take